Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to War in the Pacific, Admirals Edition, our Let's Play series against XTRG. It is now January 6th of 1942, and I'm hoping this is a bit of a quiet turn. We'll have to wait and see what actually happens, but we have ordered the HMS Hermes, which is a light carrier which launched a torpedo strike against some Japanese cruisers to no effect, to withdraw from the Mascar Strait, and we've also ordered a American heavy cruiser, or sorry, not heavy cruiser, American task force, which was bombarding Tarawa, to pull back from Tarawa as well. So the hope is this turn is a little bit devoid of action, because if it's not, then it's probably surprising actions brought against us by the Japanese, but we'll see here. We do know the Japanese have troops that our intelligence is telling us the Japanese have troops bound for Davao on the southern tip of Mindanao, which could begin the Japanese conquest of parts of the Philippines south of Luzon. And it looks like there's a task force here just off of Luzon. It also says there's sweeping mines, so they must have some minesweepers with the task force. Meanwhile, Japanese submarine firing against destroyers of ours. This is actually the task force that's escorting the Hermes, so it's a good thing that those torpedoes missed, or that they didn't find the Hermes and put any torpedoes in her. It doesn't look like the Hermes was spotted, but it is part of that task force. The torpedoes were fired, they missed, and we were unable to gain a firing position against the submarine. Meanwhile, our own submarine, the SS Sturgeon, is firing against Japanese patrol craft here on the northern tip of the island of Luzon, and it looks like they're going to fail to find it, so we'll move forward from that. SS Pollock is detecting enemy aircraft near Tarawa, and another Japanese submarine is spotted off the northern coast of New Zealand. Looks like more discoveries, but no actual combat here. The I-9 was sighted by escorts, but there was no attack against it. They were unable to locate it underwater or whatever. Some flotation stuff going on. It looks like the Japanese are bombarding on the western tip of the island of Mindanao as well at Zambronga. With some heavy cruisers here, some light cruisers. They're for sure putting a landing party ashore here. Although the good news is there's no road from here to where our troops are hung out on the island of Mindanao, so it's not going to be an easy march for his troops to go anywhere. They might use that as an airbase or a way to shut down the transit toward Bataan, but other than that, not much. Meanwhile, the Japanese are also landing troops on Belop Islands to the north of New Caledonia, just barely to the north. We saw some Japanese shipping heading in that direction. We weren't quite sure what it was for. It appears to be a small landing party coming ashore at Belop Island. It can be built into a reasonable airbase, but not really much of a port. But if they don't take New Caledonia as well, which we assume they will, then it's going to kind of be worthless. Also looks like there's a troop transport convoy or some kind of convoy here off Comac on the northern tip of New Caledonia. This is much more worrying. Again, we did see the one task force headed in this direction, but we didn't see anything this big, so I'm guessing this is an invasion force. Yep, well, patrol boat, cargo ship. There'd be no reason for these cargo ships to be here unless it was an invasion force of Mindanao, or sorry, not Mindanao, of New Caledonia. Which is where these guys are, just off the north tip. So our main force is south on the southern tip of New Caledonia. And these guys are here on the north near the city of Comac, which is connected by land and can be built into a pretty impressive base. So they are attacking here. Now, we do have I think this is a minesweeper, or an AM, basically used for like maintaining minefields at ports. But it does have a few guns, and she is firing back with gusto. She's not going to turn back the invasion all by herself. Even these Japanese cargo ships appear to have some weapons on board, but she has damaged two of their ships, one of their patrol boats, one of their cargo ships. She has put some shells into at 11,000 yards, so credit goes to the Cherol. I think it's a French ship, but I could be wrong. And, you know, this little mini gun battle here, she's heavily outnumbered. She is on fire. She is taking hits, but she's also causing hits on the Japanese patrol boat Nikki Maru. Wow, another hit, 100mm hit on the AK Yamaru. Another 100mm hit. Come on, Chevreau. I don't even know how to pronounce the name of your ship. I can't even really see it. Another 100mm hit on this patrol boat. Good on you, sir. Good on you. So the Allied task force is deciding to disengage as the Allied ship does suffer some damage here, and took a 100mm hit herself. Let's go ahead and fast forward out of this. 4 shell hits on the Maru, heavy damage. 4 shell hits on the patrol boat Santos Maru, on fire. 1 shell hit on the Nikki Maru, heavy damage. Our own ship suffered 4 hits and is on fire, but the Japanese lost 374 soldiers as casualties, 19 combat infantrymen squads destroyed, 14 damaged, 10 non-combatant squads destroyed, 10 damaged, and 2 guns lost. That is a pretty impressive result for just a tiny little AM. These Japanese troops went in unescorted, which is kind of surprising. It's unfortunate I didn't have any cruisers in the area, but if you do remember, the Kido Butai was in that general vicinity. So I don't think... It said someone's withdrawing. Task Force 86 is withdrawing. I'm assuming the Japanese aren't going to not land at Comac based off a single AM attacking them. But nonetheless, it may throw their landing parties into a little bit of disrepair. While we do have the majority of our troops in the south on the island of New Caledonia, we do have an Indian brigade, which was bound for Singapore, that we diverted there. So about 75 assault value. It's not going to hold it by itself, especially if he brings like a full regiment to bear. But it might hold a small SNLF force in place, or it might at least delay his advance down the island. Anything we can do. I mean, I'm not in a position to fully counterattack. Like, if he takes New Caledonia, he takes New Caledonia. It's not the end of the world. But, you know, we're going to have to manage that. We want to, if he is going to go for New Caledonia, we want to turn it, if we can, into an early Guadalcanal where he's overextended and unable to adequately support his troops. So as much as we can make him bleed, as much as we can draw any such invasion out, New Caledonia is probably the weakest link on the Fiji line. In my opinion, you may feel differently because it's closer to Australia, and he could base land-based bombers there with very large airfields and hit Australia itself. But in my opinion, New Caledonia is the least important of the Fiji Island defensive link because it can't effectively shut down New Zealand. It is too far west and too far north to shut down the shipping lanes to New Zealand. It can shut off sort of the center and northern part of Australia in terms of shipping, and it may well doom Port Moresby to fall. So it certainly can help control the New Guinea theater, and it can reach out and make life inconvenient. But we can route ships further south into New Zealand, which will remain out of his range, and then we can route them from New Zealand into southern Australia to Melbourne or whatnot, which will be out of range of him as well. So at the end of the day, New Caledonia is inconvenient, but Fiji would actually be a better place to cut off shipping into New Zealand or to cut off shipping into Australia, and Pago Pago as well, because of sort of them being a little bit further east and more astride likely shipping routes. But New Caledonia, the other thing about New Caledonia is it's within range of our B-17s on Fiji. So we could make, again, any force he has there under constant fire. I think we might even be able to attack New Caledonia with air power from Australia and potentially even escort it. So again, it's kind of a tricky situation. He can make life miserable for us there, but we can certainly make life for him miserable. And he'd have a very tenuous and narrow supply line. He'd have an easier job securing his flanks if he went for Fiji than if he goes for New Caledonia. He can secure his left flank, but he's still going to be under air attack in either direction, whereas Fiji's a little bit further out, a little bit less exposed to air attack from surrounding islands, which he'd be able to dominate. So I think if he takes New Caledonia to have any real effect, it's going to take a month or two worth of construction by his engineers, which we will harry all the way with our own aircraft. And it's going to require the constant maintenance of his carrier battle fleet in the South Pacific, because the second they move and are in the Dutch East Indies, we can just smash anything he has there and really, again, make life difficult for him. Most of my talking about New Caledonia, this has been a pretty quiet turn so far. You can see here temporary flotation of repairs are failing aboard the Pennsylvania. We'll have to take a look at that. He's landing on Kota something. He is also landing on Comac. Unfortunately, with our we do have that brigade there, but we don't really have much in the way of coastal guns. It's just an infantry brigade. So you can see they're landing there. They lose a small number of casualties, not many casualties lost coming ashore. Japan still has some amphibious assault bonuses for a couple more months. I think they go till May. So again, he's going to get some benefit on the landing. But if we did enough disruption to his soldiers, perhaps we can counterattack them and drive them into the sea with the troops we have. Meanwhile, he's continuing his attack at Wangkao. We only really have one strong corps there. He outnumbers us more than 3 to 1. Fortunately for us, that assault did not succeed. He only got 1 to 2 odds. So actually, we lost about 500 men, 27 squads destroyed, 16 disabled. He only lost 5 destroyed, but he lost 100 disabled. He lost 1,200 men. So a very good result for us in that battle. Meanwhile, deliberate attack at Clark Field with another 3 Japanese divisions and some other small units, including tank units, which have arrived at Clark Field. Japanese get 1-to-1 assault odds, reduce fortifications to level 0, destroy 21 squads, disable 101. They lose 19 and 97 disabled. So they actually lost more men, 1,300 to our 1,000, but they lost few enough that he could probably attack next turn and take Clark Field. So that's a little bit concerning. We're trying to pull the bulk of our troops out of Clark Field without getting them destroyed, but yeah. Meanwhile, my Indian Brigade is bombarding the Japanese troops who just came ashore. You can see they outnumber them 2 to 1 in terms of assault value. It looks like it's a portion of an SNLF force. So I don't know if I outnumber them enough to throw them into the sea, but at the very least, it's unlikely the Japanese are going to counterattack and take the base. At least I don't think they will. We have level 1 forts there too, so it's not 0, which will help us on the defensive. He'll need to land more troops there to really push us out, I think. The only question is whether we want to launch a counterattack or not and try and drive him into the sea, or whether we're content in basically pinning them in until he brings more reinforcements. Battleship Colorado is beginning upgrade on the U.S. West Coast, and I think that's going to just about do it for the turn. So the Colorado will be out of action for about 18 days as it upgrades and adds radars, and we'll jump into our turn here in a moment. Once we get out of all this end turn stuff here that you kind of see scrolling in front. It's going to kick us out to the menu screen after it tells us all the units that arrived. So I'll catch you guys on the flip side. All right, and we're back here. We're looking at China right now here. It is January 7th of 1942. In China, we're not really doing a whole lot. We've reconsolidated the AVG, or the American Volunteers Group, the Flying Tigers, here out of Changsha. Currently, are they flying cap? Yeah, let's rest these guys because they basically have been flying cap nonstop for several days now. The planes are worn out. They need maintenance. The crews are a little bit worn out. We have quite a few pilots, though, to draw from. So one of the interesting things that might be worth doing is some of these guys are really high experience. Might be worth pulling some of them back into the group reserve in order to give us a better reserve of pilots, because it's sort of off camera, I've been updating some of my training programs here, and actually I can show you this, use some of my training programs on the East Coast here in the US, and I've set everybody to 70% train, almost everybody, to 70% train rather than 100, because if you set them to 100, you can see that your op losses will increase as fatigue on the airframes increases, and then those airframes need to be swapped out or repaired or what have you, and it can result in essentially dead crews during training, which was a huge problem in the United States with just completely novice and green crews. There was a bomber pilot, I forget the name of the pilot, but he served 25 tours, including during Black Thursday. I think it was Black Thursday, the Schweinfurt raid. He served 25 missions in Europe in harrowing conditions and ended up coming back home after his tour was done. But when your tour is done, that doesn't mean you're out of the military. It actually means what happens is you kind of rotate back and you can help train people, but you're no longer in combat. And he nearly died on several occasions because pilot training was just so haphazard. And they lost many crews to plane crashes in the United States while training. He thought it was safer to go back to combat in Europe than it was to stay home. And maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but in any event, he went back to Europe and did another tour with the 15th Air Force flying out of Italy. So, the point is, if you set training to really high levels, you get a lot of ops losses. You get a lot of dead, inexperienced pilots. There's not much purpose to that. So We've set all of our training, or the most part. I guess these guys are on 40. But we've set all of our training here to 70% in the U.S. East Coast. These are large groups. You can see we've got 30-plus pilots in several of these groups, despite only having 20 planes. We've actually basically maxed out the number of pilots. You can see these are inexperienced units. We've stripped them of experienced pilots, and we are training these guys, these green crews here, as low as 20 experience in some cases. You can see here we're focusing on air combat for the fighters and bombing, and specifically airfield bombing for the bomber crews. They're not all that inexperienced, but several of them are. You can see this group's a little bit more. They've got a bunch of pilots in the 50s. I'm assuming once they get up to 60, I'll probably transfer them into the reserve, though maybe mid-50s might be adequate. I was informed in the in-between turn that this orange does not represent a decrease in skill. In fact, the green represents this last turn, the skill went up. The orange represents within the last month it went up. So you can see here that a bunch of these pilots are getting quite a bit of air experience, and while their overall piloting experience isn't super high, these guys are in the upper 60s in some of these cases in terms of their air-to-air combat skills. So quite a few, these guys have alarmingly high fatigue levels. But quite a few crews here with reasonably good experience here that we're trying to improve on a bit. Doesn't look like any of these guys have lost ops losses yet, so that's good. I don't want to lose pilots just for the sake of losing pilots. I have transferred fighters to Balikpapan, so that does strip out some of our Air Force at Singapore a bit, and we're actually going to rest our crews at Singapore this turn, so we've got about 51 ready aircraft still at Singapore, 69 total between the Warhawks and the Buffaloes. But I have transferred 15 of the Flying Tigers that were at Singapore and 10 Buffaloes to Balikpapan in the event that XTRG does decide to return with his light carriers. This is an amusing intelligence report. There are definitely not 5 heavy fleet carriers and 3 light carriers in this task force. The irony here is they say, oh my God, there's like 7 aircraft carriers in this task force. And then you dig a little deeper and you're like, yeah, how many aircraft? Well, 25 fighters, 20 bombers, and 35 auxiliary. So what you're basically telling me is there's one carrier worth of one fleet carrier worth of aircraft here. Yeah, but there's 6 or 7 fleet carriers. No, Recon, you're wrong. But in any event, his carriers appear to be pulling out to the east after the raid on Balikpapan. We lost several ships at Balikpapan to his air raids. We do have a couple that are still in port here with pretty bad damage. He mostly shut down Balikpapan. There was one light cargo ship that did escape. It can carry 1,700 cargo, and we're going to send it on one last run to Bataan. If she makes it, she may be the last supply ship that makes it to Bataan, but I'm trying to keep Bataan's supply up. It's still above the spoilage threshold, so they're still going to be getting some spoilage from turn to turn. But we're also going to be expending supply here to build these fortifications up. So I want to try and replace as much of that as I can before it's completely shut down. Now, obviously, the Japanese are trying to take Zamboganda. And if they do, once they get air units in here, the Celeb Sea and the Sulu Sea will be completely shut off to our shipping. Realistically, the South China Sea already is from air bases along the Vietnam coast. So this is our last chance to maybe get an extra 2,000 supply in to help offset the cost of the supply for building up the defenses. Meanwhile, about a third of our force still remains at Clark Field. They got attacked last turn, and the defense did not go well. If Japan attacks again, it is very possible that they will throw us back and push us back into Bataan. If they do attack again, that's pretty bad news for us. Our troops aren't going to make it out. They need 2 more days to march out. So I'm actually going to set all these guys to a combat stance, just in the hope that the combat stance will give them a better chance of throwing back another attack if the Japanese do decide to attack. Setting them to a combat stance in this menu does not actually cancel their march moves, so they'll continue marching back to Bataan, but they'll, I think, have a better chance of resisting the Japanese here in a defensive engagement. Even if I lose like 100 or 200 assault value, I want to maintain as much of that as possible. You can see these guys are still moving back. They'll just move a little bit slower. So I think they're averaging about 10 to 11 miles per day right now in march mode. In combat mode, they might only average 5 or 6 miles. But even if they get 5 miles, and we can move them over to move mode, and then they can evacuate before the next turn. So hopefully we can throw these Japanese back here at Clark Field one last time. Meanwhile, I have also moved some of my torpedo bombers out to Johor Bahru. As you remember, he had bombed this airfield quite extensively, and he had shut it down completely to air activity not that long ago. But he has since stopped bombing there with the massive bomber losses that he faced over Singapore. He's really been focusing his fighter sweeps and his limited bomber raids on Singapore. But Singapore's too built up. You know, if he hits Singapore with 12 or 16 or 20 sallies, it's going to take a while to shut that down with all of the support facilities built up around it. He really needs a larger air armada, but he's already kind of sacrificed a lot of his aircraft in the failed bombing raids against Singapore. So we've decided, in the interest of security, however, to move our Wildebeests, our 21 torpedo bombers, north to Johor Bahru, mainly just in the event that he bombs so that they're not there. That's the goal there. Meanwhile, our somewhat ravaged bomber force of Blenheim 4s and 1s and Hudsons, all these guys with very little aircraft left because of all the air raids on Mersing that really chewed these guys up. There's still about 50 aircraft at Johor Bahru as sort of our secondary airfield. So really what that's going to leave at Singapore is just the fighters. We pulled out the majority of the B-17s as well. So we've got 3 B-17s that are on the ground right now that are being repaired, but I've pulled the remaining B-17s out to Palembang. Again, I don't know how much longer I can withstand his air raids, and really my goal is just to bleed him at Singapore, but I don't want to leave him any exposed targets. So if we pull back to Palembang, unfortunately, we can only bomb with extended bomb loads because it's a smaller airfield, so we can't go with the 8 500-pounders. We can only go with the 4. But it does seem like he's got cap up over Mersing, and I'm assuming he's got cap up over Miri after a couple of bombing raids against his oil facilities there. So I don't think these guys are going to be doing a lot of aggressive bombing, maybe on the Japanese infantry when they move further south, but for the time being, I'd rather get them back out to Balikpapan and essentially just get them out of there so they can, not suffer too much. Meanwhile, it might not be a bad idea to use them as supply transports to bring additional supplies into Singapore. So, well, actually, no, we'll stand down, because if he's going to send fighter sweeps, they'll be sitting ducks, and I don't want them to just get shot down. How are the pilots in these crews? They're actually not super experienced either. I could take the moment here to train these guys. We'll set them a ground attack. Set all level bombers at this base. Yeah, so we'll train these guys up. These 15 B-17s that we pulled out. I'm not really getting any replacement B-17s either right now. I was looking back through here, and it doesn't look like, if we actually go to the force menu here, we can see that the B-17D does start coming online. Was this the D? Yeah, this is the D. In December of 41. We're getting some LB-30 Liberators, so I don't know. Yeah, we're getting some Liberators, but not many. We've only gotten 3. We have no heavy bombers in our replacement pools at the moment, so that's a problem. Actually, let's go ahead and take a look at the aircraft replacement pool. U.S. Army. Let's do heavy bombers. So it looks like we've used 3 B-17D replacements, but it's currently replacing at 0 per month. We're building 0 B-17s per month. We're currently building 8 LB-30 Liberators, which is sort of an early version of the Liberator. I think that's more of a maritime version of the Liberator. But nonetheless, we're building 8 of those a month. So we've got 3 in stock, but I mean, that's not enough to do anything. We are building 15 Flying Fortress E's, so B-17Es. These have a slightly shorter range, but they're the more conventional B-17 makeup. They've got the ball turret on the bottom. Again, slightly shorter range. We're building 15 of those a month, and we are using them in the South Pacific a bit. We've got some of these on Suva, so that's useful. But we won't really be seeing any new models until the middle of the year. We'll get the B-24D will come online with 15 a month in July, and then in August the B-17F at 24 a month will come online in August. And then once we get into 43, then we start seeing some bigger replacements, the B-24D at 33 a month, the B-24J at 38 a month. And I think these rates do pick up a little bit also later in the war as the industry ramps up. But the long story short is, for a while now, we're not going to have a ton of bombers. So we have to kind of be careful with that. We do get the B-17G at 135 a month. But it doesn't look like that happens till late war, I think. End date, it looks like this is ending production. The LB ends, yeah. Huh. Replacement rate, production rate. What's the difference between the two? I don't know. That's a good question. Anyway, that's the heavy bomber situation in short. Long story short, it's going to take a while. Meanwhile, now that his carriers are pulling out, I did notice there is 30,000 fuel at Balikpapan and 38,000 oil. That's going to keep going up, but he didn't really do much damage to the port facilities. So if he really is pulling these carriers out east, I am going to take a gamble here, and I'm going to send some tankers. So these guys are already loading up, and so are these guys. So we're going to be bringing about 7,000 or about 8,000 oil to Australia, another 20,000 fuel out of Java. But I've also formed up a new tanker convoy here that's going to be going to Balikpapan, 41,000 capacity with 2 destroyer escorts. We're also going to move the Hermes back east, just in the event that, hey, maybe we can get in there. Hermes is moving to about here, so she'll provide some cover. With the additional 30 fighters here, these tankers that are moving into Balikpapan are kind of going to be a little bit of a bait for the Japanese. So I don't know if he can fly sweeps over Balikpapan from Miri, but if he can, that's a long-range sweep. He's going to lose a lot to ops losses. So my assumption is he's only got a few fighters here. This might be a great chance to whittle down his super experienced bomber pilots if we can break through the fighter screen, and if anyone can do it, it's going to be the AVG boys. So bringing these tankers east is a little bit of a risk, but on the flip side, it's also potential for an ambush. Additionally, if the Japanese do go for the tankers, that might leave Hermes open to torpedo bomb the actual carriers themselves, and the fighters at Balikpapan can also act as a top cover for Hermes also. So Hermes pulled back to Surabaya, but she also was able to replenish her torpedo stores there. So at this point, we're ready to move back east, and a little bit of an aggressive move. And if he does swing this direction, he's going to have to cross a tripwire of submarines here at the Mascar Strait. Actually, these guys, you do need to return. You're low on fuel. Yeah, speaking of submarines, we probably should also form up. I think we've got some additional subs here at this base. So maybe we can form ooh, we really don't have that many, but we do have one American S-boat, so that's good. How's the commander? What's he rate at? Let's get a better commander. Aggression 59. That's too low. Let's get a better aggression rating. I'm kind of torn here. I want an aggressive commander, but the S-boats are also more fragile and likely to get sunk. So I don't want to lose one of my best commanders because they get a very aggressive officer. But I am going to put W.A. Lent in charge. He's a lieutenant commander, an aggression of 74 with a naval skill of 70. That is damn good. And he's going to be in charge of this S-boat. So we're going to go ahead and send these guys, with no retirement allowed, into the tip of the Strait of Mascar as well. So if he does return, he's going to have to cross a tripwire of 3 submarines. All of these are capable submarines with good torpedoes, 1 Dutch sub, 2 American S-boats, and a 3rd American S-boat. So he's going to have to cross that tripwire, which could pose problematic for him. Also, if we do have these subs that are damaged, we need to send these guys into the shipyards here. And I think, well, it doesn't really matter if I set them to high or medium. They're all going to... So we'll set this guy here. We'll set this Sea Dragon. Our subs have taken a beating, I will say that. Okay. So these guys are going to be in port for a while. I think part of that is because we've got other ship... No, these are the only ships we have under repair there. So the shipyard capacity is definitely not all being used. In any event, the good news is while our subs have taken a bit of a beating, they also have multiple shipyards nearby to help them, whereas when his subs get hurt, they pretty much have to return to Japan, like from the South Pacific. So that's a bit of a risk. We have slowed down our heavy cruisers here. We know they're landing at Comac, so we're still sending some ships in, but the picture is not very clear about what they have. I'm assuming his merchant ships are going to pull back. Did we lose anything, or did they lose anything last turn? Oops. Last turn, the I-166 is supposedly sunk near Dejima by a depth charge attack. I'm starting to get a little bit skeptical of all these submarine casualties, just because if we look at these and we take out our allied subs, this is saying he's already lost 5 subs, which seems like a lot of fleet boats. I mean, that's a lot of damage to a subforce. I'm guessing we've badly damaged 5 subs, but I don't think we've actually sunk 5 fleet boats. On our end, we have lost 2 subs, the S-38, which was lost near Legepsi to depth charge, and the Sarjo, which was lost near Taiwan to mines just a couple of days ago. The Pike, which I mentioned last video and forgot to check on them, is in the process of retreating. We're trying to get her back to Australia. She's got pretty heavy damage at 51 float damage, 41 systems damage, and she's only making 5 knots. It's dicey whether she'll make it. She may sink, but she's trying to make it back, so we'll see if she can. The cruisers are slowing down a bit. I'm also going to meet them with a light cruiser out of Brisbane, so that'll strengthen our force to 3 heavies, 2 lights, and 3 destroyers, all in relatively good shape, all with good fuel loads. And the Australia and the Cunnabarra should have anti-ship radar. Or maybe that's air search radar, so maybe not. Maybe they don't have gun control on their radar. But in any event, that's what they're doing. We have some cargo ship convoys which are setting out for the U.S. empty, so we're going to send some large cargo ships to the United States to load up with to load up with supply to help resupply Australia. Australia actually is doing okay supply-wise. Australian industry will produce pretty much all the supply you need if you supply it with fuel. So all that fuel we've been pulling out of the Dutch East Indies is going to use, so that's good. New Zealand, on the other hand, their fuel stocks are tanked. We've sucked all the fuel out of Auckland, most of the fuel out of Wellington. Australia is very low on, or New Zealand is very low on fuel right now. And they also have industry. So in addition to supporting all these task forces and these destroyers and that was Queen Elizabeth, by the way, still around and kicking, and these heavy cruisers which suffered a lot of systems damage because they ran out of fuel. So you can still move these ships like 1 hex per turn when they're out of fuel, but they take huge amounts of damage. So we need to pull them out to Australia to get them replenished. But these guys replenishing basically drained most of the North Island of New Zealand's fuel loads. The good news is we have more on the way. So we did have this task force here, which is on the way from the United States with about 57,000 fuel load. We had to stop at Tahiti and unload a little bit and then replenish the task force. So we've got these guys on their way to Auckland with 57,000 fuel. And then we have these guys on their way to Suva with 23,000 fuel. Not a lot of fuel, but enough. We've got some ships in port here that need to get away, but we have no fuel to get them away. Fuel is totally out on the island of Fiji. So we're going to bring about 20,000 fuel to Suva. We're going to bring about 50,000 to New Zealand. And then we've got about another 23,000, or no, that's 23,000 to Suva. And then we've got another 40,000-ish fuel that's on the way to Auckland as well. So all told, we're bringing just shy of 100,000 fuel to the North Island of New Zealand, which should be enough to maintain New Zealand's industry while also supporting ships for at least a little while. Additionally, we do have about 40,000 fuel that's unloading at Pago. So between the 20,000 unloading at Fiji, the 40,000 that's unloading at Pago, that should give us enough fuel to supply our shipping in sort of our wartime shipping at these forward deployed bases. And the 100,000 fuel at New Zealand will provide both a ready reserve, which we have at least 1 fuel oil. Actually, we have 2 oilers at New Zealand. They can kind of race forward as necessary with with some of the fuel on board, but also so we can make sure that we're adequately ready for the ships that we are operating in the area. I will say these guys are out of fuel. I'm so bad with keeping track of this sometimes. Do I have any? I don't think I have any replenishment. All right, so next turn I'll load up some fuel on the Neosho once Pago's received some of that fuel from those tankers, and then I'll send it north to this Fulton here, which is suffering a lot of systems damage because it's low on fuel. We also have 2 fighter groups, the 78th and 47th Squadrons that are on their way to Suva. The 78th Squadron is loaded with 16 P-40B Warhawks, and the 47th is loaded with 15 P-40B Warhawks. So about 33 fighter aircraft are on their way to Suva. So in addition to the fighters that we already have on Suva, which is about 30 naval fighter aircraft, 12 Wildcats and 18 Buffaloes, we'll also have an additional 30 Army aircraft, which will give us 50 fighters at the Suva base, which should be pretty strong in terms of any Japanese movement against Fiji. I kind of get the sense he's moving on New Caledonia, and I don't know if he's going to move on Fiji. I don't know if this is a play to threaten Australia or threaten the New Zealand supply line. Frankly, it's not going to do it. If you look at these, bases, that's 9, 12, 15, 18, 21 hexes from the northern tip of New Zealand to Nomaya, if he even takes Nomaya. So even if he takes New Caledonia, yes, the risk is he can open up bombing against the Australian coast, the eastern Australian coast, and that's problematic from an industry perspective. But we also have 75 fighter aircraft that are going to be arriving in Australia very soon, in about a week. And these bombing raids won't be over short distances if they occur. I mean, you're talking 15 plus hexes. If he does escort these, I mean, he's going to be getting into a situation like at Guadalcanal, where the Japanese tried to escort raids against Guadalcanal from Rabaul. They could do it, but they cannibalized their fighter fleet because they were just so exhausted by the time they arrived. But anyway, so long story short, if he does arrive at New Caledonia, it's going to take him several weeks to build up his air force there to be able to do anything. And then if he does try and hit Australia, he's going to be at the edge of his supply line. If he hits New Zealand, he's going to be hitting without fighter escort. He's not going to be able to shut down commerce because we can always swing our transports a little bit further south to Auckland or even down to Wellington, which has a reasonable port there as well. If he tries to hit the Australian industry, he's going to be going up against a considerable fighter force that we're going to bring to bear against him. So New Caledonia is a hindrance, but it doesn't shut anything down, and it's all within B-17 range of Suva, although not our fighters. Our fighters can't escort that far. Long story short, it's just without taking Fiji or without taking Pago, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, maybe he's going to try and expand his reach from Savi, which he did take, but even so, I don't know. I'm kind of curious about all of this. Anyway, long-winded way of saying we also have the Indian Brigade against these SNLF forces, which are landing, and we're bringing these cruisers up to engage. So that's about all I've got this turn. A lot of logistical things happening. I'm bringing in large numbers of tankers here from the Middle East, kind of pulling fuel out of Abadan. In terms of SIGINT for January 6th, not a lot of intelligence this turn. You can see here's the intelligence report, some information about different units that are located in different places, some really big breaking news that the Missouri Fortress is located at Missouri, the Hakodate Fortress is located at Hakodate, that kind of fun stuff. We do see that the 6th Field Air Force Construction Battalion is moving to Miri, so assuming he's going to increase the airfield size at Miri, probably so that he can operate bombers effectively out of here. Right now it's a level 2 airfield. He probably wants to expand it to its 5, and then he can use the bombers out of there to shut down these areas, and maybe also knock out Balkapin with naval bombers from Miri. Not much I can do about that. I do have submarines that are trying to block the entrance to Miri, mainly because I thought maybe he'd bring tankers in at play. I haven't seen a single Japanese tanker since the war started. Those are priority number 1 if we can find any. Meanwhile, my tankers are pretty much all in action. We don't have enough. That's one of the things the Allies really don't have enough. Every single one of my tankers is currently in a task force doing something, with the exception of one guy here, the Sundmarl, which is currently at Surabaya waiting for some of the port facilities to open up, and then we're going to load her up with some fuel. So all of our tankers are currently transiting or carrying fuel or doing something. Because it's just, you can't afford as the Allies. Even our fleet oilers are all doing something, with the exception of these 2 guys here in New Zealand, which are waiting for that extra fuel to show up to New Zealand there. and one guy here at Cristobal, which is actually on the Panama coast. I should probably do something with that. In addition to that, the majority of my cargo ships are also doing something, so we're kind of busy on all fronts there. One other thing is here, the surface combat, these guys, the repulse, still too far away, I think that, yeah, not quite ready for flank speed, but maybe next turn. So probably repulse, and my guess is repulse will arrive at Cape Town in about 2 days. She'll start repairing. We've got all these tankers over here, which are, where are they going? Oh, they're going to Cape Town. Oh yeah, that's going to be my shuttle between the U.S. East Coast and Cape Town. The Prince of Wales is now off map, 54 flooding, speed of 8. She's slowly making her way toward Cape Town. She's out of enemy danger, so the Japanese can no longer intercept the repulse because the Japanese can't move off map. So the repulse is, or the Prince of Wales is off map, can't be intercepted, but theoretically, I suppose bad weather could hit her. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the situation right now. I mean, it's a bit of an in-between turn. There's, again, a lot of logistics and things like that going on. I'm trying not to bore you guys with all that. The 18th British Infantry Division, which was those 3 brigades that were bound for Singapore, has arrived in India. So we've merged it into the division rather than the 3 brigades. And we're going to rail it over to Dimpur, which maybe we'll move it into Burma from there. There's no rail line connecting Burma and India. Yeah, so I mean, that's the situation right now. This is kind of tentatively the conclusion of my turn. We'll see. I may make some changes between now and when I actually send it. But yeah, anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this episode of our War in the Pacific series. I don't have a lot else to share with you at this time, but we'll definitely see what happens here. Hopefully we can hold out at Clark Field one more turn and get those troops out of there without too much damage. And the logistical train moves on so that we can hopefully, continue a successful Pacific campaign against the Japanese here. Maybe New Caledonia is being used to shut down Port Moresby, so we can take Moresby, because that is worth 280 to the Japanese in terms of victory points. New Caledonia is worth 300 to the Allies. Not that much to Japan, actually, but quite a bit to the Allies if he goes for Nomaya. So that can be, those are victory point hits, but at the end of the day, they're not, 300 is less than the bombers he's lost over Singapore so far in terms of victory points. So I think we can probably make it by. Meanwhile, we got 3 tankers here bringing about 35,000 fuel into Australia as well. So fuel that Australian industry. Because again, the more fuel you have, the more supply you have in Australia, the more supply you have, well, then you can just start bringing in large numbers of troops. So that's the situation, guys. I'm going to sign off. I hope you guys enjoyed, and until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.